introduction. Good morning to all. Welcome back to those who are joining us from the Excel Essentials course and continuing on now with the Advanced. And also welcome to all the newbies who have jumped straight into the Advanced course. This particular section, especially the first half of it, will be particularly aimed at you guys, the chaps who haven't done the Essentials course, because there are some key essentials, as the first tab suggests, which we need to make sure we are all familiar with before we continue with the advanced section. Everybody says, please teach me VLOOKUP and pivot tables and macros. But often what trips us up are some key essentials, which we do teach in the Essentials course, but a lot of people who are self-taught have these gaps and holes in the Excel skill set. And so we're going to kick off with some key things. The first one is the data types which we work with day in and day out. And this top section here will give me an overview of the different data types that we typically work with. So starting from the left, we've got text, a basic text, simple hello, and then alphanumeric, which is a combination of both text and numbers. Here we have two numbers. One is just a whole number and the other one is a decimal. And the key thing that we have picked up on and we've emphasized many times over the past few weeks is that text is always aligned on the left and numbers are always aligned on the right. And if you don't have that set up like that, so for example, if you enter a numerical value and you think it's going to be a numerical value and it aligns on the left, there's something dramatically wrong. And so we need to fix that at that point in time. So many people are working with incorrect data because of that very point. It brings us down to a third data type, which is working with dates and times. And just to quickly remind you, there's a lovely little shortcut which will enter the current date and time. So Control and the colon key will give me that. So the current date, the 10th of the 5th, 2019, and it puts it in your format. I'm going to tab along and put in the current time, which is Control Shift and the colon key. Gives me the current time. And if I want to do a combination of date and time, I'm going to do Control and the colon key, put in a space, and then Control Shift and the colon key to give me a combination of date and time. And if we use our golden rule of text on the left, numbers on the right, date and time would obviously fall into the number category. And I can prove that very easily to you if I highlight those cells and force it to display as a numerical value. You can see I get 43595 as the value for this current day, and that's the number of days since the 1st of January 1900, and that's how Excel stores dates. And the time is stored as a fraction of a day. So 0.46, it means it'll be 46% through our day, and combine those together, we have both the whole number for the date and the decimal component for the time. And because dates and times are stored as numerical values, we can actually compute with them and work with them and group them in their classic categories of months and years. And that enables us now to work with dates a lot more efficiently than if we hadn't stored it as a genuine date and stored it as a text label. So a lot of that was covered in the Essentials course. That's a quick whip through of that. A few key components that you need to be aware of when you're working in Excel are these four items here. And the settings that we need to be aware of is what your decimal is set to. So some of you may have a decimal set as a comma, so you'd have 10,5 instead of 10.5. Some of you may have the thousand separator set as a comma instead of a space. List separator, you can't see it at face value here, but if I double click in there, there's actually a if statement formula. And you can see the arguments there are separated by a comma. In my case, you may very well have that set to a semicolon, especially if your decimal is a comma, that will be set to a semicolon, so it avoids ambiguity. And then your date, that's Christmas Day. Seems like a long way off, but I think yesterday we did a training session and calculated it's only 230 days away. And so that is my date, or the Christmas Day, sorry, in my date format, and yours potentially could be very different. The important thing, though, is to be aware of what yours is set to. So those are the standard default South African settings, but a lot of people have overwritten those because they work with third-party software which has different settings that they need to integrate with. So for example, Pastel Accounts has a comma instead of a point as its decimal by default, and so a lot of people copying and pasting data between Excel and Pastel will then typically set their decimal symbol to be a comma and not a point. And so it's important that we know what they set to, and there's an exercise next week where we'll actually go into the regional settings and fiddle with those to see where we can modify them and change them if need be. For now, though, just be aware of them. Then on the right-hand side, just be aware that number formats can often be what we call a facade, meaning that what you see is not what you get. And so here's a little overview of all the different types of number formats here. So if I click on the little drop down at the top under my number formatting, I've basically taken a screenshot of those and listed them all down here on the left. There's their name, we can see a bit clearer. And each of these cells here are formatted by the data type on the left-hand side. And you can see I've got a figure of 1.5 and how many different ways 1.5 can be displayed. So as a date, it's the 1st of the 1st, 1900. As a time, it's 12 o'clock because it's 0.5. And so believe it or not, those are the exact same numbers, but just displayed differently. And so it's very important that we are aware that often what we see can be a facade to what the underlying value actually is and deceive us. So for example here, very simply, that's been rounded to the nearest whole number. We think it's 2, but it's actually 1.5. And so you can fiddle with this, change it to 10.3, and you can see all those values change. And again, illustrating how one value can be displayed so many different ways. Then finally, what Excel also does is that sometimes it actually interprets your data as a particular format. So you'll notice each of these cells here now do not contain a particular format. Scrolling through those, but take a peek at the top here, they're all general format. However, if I enter in a format that Excel recognizes, it will try and convert it into that particular format using your regional settings. So if I enter the date as 2019 with forward slashes, so we're on May 05 and it's the 10th, Excel recognizes that as a date, switches it into my date format, and you can see it's converted it into the date data type format. Be aware of entering partial dates. So if I entered just the day and the month, so if I entered 09 and typed in here May, we think that's a partial date, but Excel has to have the full components. And so if I click on that, you can see the default of the year is 2019. And so unbeknown to us, when we enter a date without a year, so a yearless date, it defaults to the current year. And similarly, if I enter a dayless date, so if I enter 09 and the year, which is, sorry, not 09, it's 05, not that far through our year yet, so there's 2019, it automatically assumes the 1st of that month. So those can be quite useful. Because sometimes we're working in the current year and we just want to enter the day and the month and it defaults to the current year. But as long as you're aware that Excel is doing that, that's the important thing. Also, if I enter a time, we think we're entering the value 12, but the actual underlying value of that is 0.5. And if I show my number conversion of that, what that would be, there 0.50, that tells me exactly what the underlying value is. Currency can often be a pain as well, because when we start to enter value, say for example I had a code which was R10. I type it in, Excel automatically converts it to currency and displays on the right hand side. And so sometimes Excel is too clever for what we want, and if that is the case, if I wanted to enter a code of R10, I could just prefix it with an apostrophe, which forces it to be text, and so it doesn't default to the currency format. Then percentages, be aware when you enter a percentage that you are actually entering a fraction, so that there's actually 0.1, not 10. Click on that, 0.1. We emphasize this greatly in the Essentials course. I simply wanted to run through that to make sure everybody was up to speed. And there are a whole lot of notes below here. So your workbook doubles up as notes. You can jot them down if you want to, but everything you need to know will be written in these blue boxes. So those are the notes for that particular section. Okay, moving on to the next sheet. So if you can skip across to the golden rule sheet. So we're here now under the golden rules. Some of you may recognize this if you did the homework exercise for the Key Essentials course. I think it was homework exercises 2 and 3. You would have completed this exercise and hopefully got something that looks like this. This is a personal budget which has been set up to keep track of a budget or set out a budget for a particular calendar year. And we've added a few bells and whistles like conditional formatting and a couple of graphs underneath here. And what I want to do is to actually use this to run through some of the golden rules for spreadsheet integrity. Now, hopefully many of you know some of these rules already, but it is so important that we cover these so that when we go forward, we don't make some key mistakes, which a lot of advanced users are currently doing. And so the key thing at the beginning, starting at point number 1, is that numbers, dates, and times should align on the right. Okay, and so we can see here, we've got numerical values, they align on the right, especially when my column is wider, that's exaggerated. And anything text, so these labels and the headings across the top, are aligned on the left. And that's a key thing to remember. When it comes to partial dates, though, for example, these months are listed just as the month component. Now, as it stands here, that would be perfectly fine. But in another context, I should actually convert those to dates. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top 3 rows up into December, and I'm going to copy those. I'm going to use a little feature which we taught you last time. I'm just going to scroll across to the right, hopefully you can see that. And I'm going to do a paste special, right click, paste special, and choose my formulas and number formats, but also transpose my data at the same time, which means my rows becomes columns and my column become rows. And so here, if I wanted to just transcribe my incomes, income 1 and 2, and list the months down the left-hand side, that looks fairly straightforward without any issues. However, if I had to ever resort this data, as it stands, if I sorted the months here and I select my data ribbon at the top and click on A to Z, notice that that sorts alphabetically. Obviously got some formulas in here, so that's why I'm getting some errors. But if I had converted those as genuine dates, then when I sorted that and had to sort it back again, I would definitely get it in the correct order. So to quickly illustrate what I'm meaning here, I'm just going to insert one more column. And to put in January as the first of the first 2019, let's say it's a budget for 2019, I'm going to convert that to a date which is going to display just the month. But before I do that, I'm going to replicate it all the way down through to December. And I'm going to use my option override here, autofill override, just to fill the months. So you can see here that very conveniently does all the months with the first of the month each time. Then I'm going to call up my number formatting, and Control-1 is a nice shortcut for that. And under custom formatting, I'm just going to display that as MMM, my months. Okay, so this looks exactly the same as my text months. The clue there, though, is that it's aligned on the right. And so if I manage to get this out of order by sorting it by those months, if I select the one on the left-hand side and sort those, notice that they sort chronologically, whereas these sort alphabetically. And that's a very important point to note, because often we reorder our data and then we want to get it back into chronological format. And if we aren't working with a genuine date, it's going to sort alphabetically, not chronologically. And so the point here is partial dates. If necessary, convert them to genuine dates and just display the component you want to see. Then next thing we're going to look at is formulas. Now, if you've never seen the spreadsheet before, what could be tricky is trying to determine exactly how this thing is put together and how it's working. We know if we select a cell and we take a look at the formula bar, it will display the formula behind that cell if there is a formula. If it's a hard-coded entered value, then it will display the value itself. So I could spend a bit of time going through my various different cells and having a look at the formula bar, but that's going to be pretty time-consuming. So there's some very neat formulas, neat functions or features which enable us to view the formulas behind all the cells in the spreadsheet at once. And to do that, if I go to our formulas ribbon, you can see there's an option here under formula auditing to show the formulas. And if I click on that, notice the shortcut, it's Control and the little apostrophe that's at an angle, which is on the tilde key. So if I click on that, it displays the formulas behind the value. And if I select any of those cells, it then gives me a look at to exactly which values were used in that formula. And so I don't have to double click on it to see the values used. Simply scrolling through my different cells, it will give me that. So I can see at a glance the way this has been built is that each successive month is equal to the previous month. There are a few exceptions, so you can see happen June. And then there are a couple of expenses here where I'm increasing the value by 1% each month. I guess that's for inflation. And there are a couple of cells which are calculated outright. So for example, here my miscellaneous column is 10% of my combined income. So the more we spend, the more we earn, the more we spend. And so we're taking care of that with our miscellaneous column. So in this format, it's much quicker for me to get a handle on how the spreadsheet is put together simply by displaying the formulas, selecting them and seeing which cells are being used. Obviously, it does mess with your column widths, so you wouldn't typically work with it like this, but you can just toggle between these, displaying the values and the formulas by using the Control and your tilde key. Instead of having to go up here to the menu item, Control tilde is squished between your tab and your escape key, and so toggling between those will display the formulas and take it back to the calculated values. And so that's a very neat way to get an overview and also to check formulas in your spreadsheet. Some other formula auditing tools which are very useful are tools to be able to trace which cells are used in formulas. And so the first one we're going to do is to trace cells back and which cells are used to create a particular value. Now, one of the key components here is my total expenses, which is found in cell N20. And typically, if I wanted to see which values are used to calculate that, I would double click on it and you can see it conveniently highlights it for me. We all know that. However, if I wanted to know how far back that had to go, I could use this feature called trace precedence or precedence. I don't know how to pronounce that word, but anyway, it basically trails back. And here you can see it's highlighted exactly the same as if I double clicked on it. So nothing new at this point. But if I click on it a second time, it actually shows me there then that these values have been calculated by working with the values from January through to December. Click on it a third time. And my miscellaneous column, or row I should say, has been calculated using the income. And if I click on it a further time, you can see my December value was actually used, and all of these subsequent values were calculated ultimately using my January values for income 1 and income 2. And if you click on it again, I don't know if you heard that, but that's sound that says that basically it doesn't go back any further. And so you can see that pretty much every single value here has been used to calculate the total expenses value. And I can use my trace precedence to show that to me. And to take that off, just click on remove arrows and it will disappear. Then another useful feature is to show if a cell is being used elsewhere in a spreadsheet. Often we have massive spreadsheets and we have certain values and we think, is this being used in a calculation? It's not giving me any valid information at this point, but it might be used elsewhere. To check that, you can click on trace dependence, if there's anything dependent on it. And if I click on the same cell and trace dependence, you can see that my net value is obviously dependent on it, because that's just subtracting total expense from total income to give you my net. And the expense percentage is being calculated using the individual totals for each of my expense and dividing it by the total expense, converting to a percentage. And so that's very useful to see where data or cells are being used in further calculations. Then also a useful feature is to check if we have any errors in our spreadsheet. Now, off the bat, Excel does highlight possible errors by putting little green triangles in the top left-hand corner of a cell. So starting at the top here, you can see if I click on that and hover over the warning symbol, it says the formula in the cell differs from the formulas in other areas of the spreadsheet. And if I double click on that, you can see that's increasing May's value by 10%. Put in context, income 2 is a flat rental, and we're bumping up the guy's rent in June on his annual release by 10%. And so that formula is actually legit. And it therefore makes the subsequent month spends equal to June. And so that was one small change which cascaded through to the remainder of the year. And so that's legitimate. And is good practice, if you have a legitimate formula difference in a spreadsheet, rather go and force Excel to ignore the error so that it doesn't stand out. If you don't ignore the error, then you could potentially have something else pop up, and because you've ignored all the other ones, you ignore a genuine error. And so ones which aren't actually genuine errors, Excel just highlighted something which you are well aware of, go and remove them. And so here, these changes in my phone contract in March, those are all legitimate. And so I'm going to highlight all of them, and you can do this, do all of them at once. Click on the little drop down and choose to ignore the error. If you've managed to miss a few though, what you can do is actually click on this error checking, and Excel will try and run through the spreadsheet and pick out any errors that you may have missed. And so if I click on the error checking here, you'll notice it picks up on one. It did actually have a little green triangle. If you look very carefully there is one there, and it basically was hidden because of my conditional formatting on that particular column. And so I've got a couple of options here. If I double click on that cell, you can notice it's actually stopped short of December, so it hasn't actually included that in the particular cell. And so if I click on resume, what Excel prompts me to do here is to copy the formula from above. So the above formula we're assuming is doing it correctly, and so if I do that, it should then correct it. Click on next. Are there any others? No, click on OK. And that should have corrected. I'm not too sure why that didn't correct. I'm going to have to force it manually. Copying the formula from above should have fixed that. My apologies. I'm not sure why that one didn't. But at least it highlighted what the error was, and I've now corrected it, and that little green triangle falls away. So you can use your error checking to find other errors that you may have missed. Okay. Then one important point we want to raise here is that empty cells are not the same for zero entered cells when it comes to working with aggregations. And so to highlight that, we're going to squeeze in an average column between M and N. So right click on N, click on insert, and we're going to type in here average. Okay. And here we're going to calculate the average of all my months. So I'm going to cheat and just use my auto sum. So either under the formula ribbon, which I'm already at, or under the home ribbon, I'm going to select average, and it should put in my function for me. Select average, and why is it not? Equal to average, and select my data all the way through to December. And click on enter. Okay, so I was forced to type it in there. That should have popped in. Obviously, some gremlins creeping in here. It always happens when I do live webinars. Anyway, we've circumnavigated that because there's always more than one way to do something in Excel. So that's calculates the average income one, and I want to replicate that all the way down to miscellaneous. So let's do that. Double clicking takes me down to the first empty row, and so that's an average. Now, if I draw my attention to my car repayments, from September through to December, I wasn't paying anything. And the average works out to be 2,000. If I delete those values though, notice that the average increases to 3,000 because now those cells are not included. And so it's just the average of all of these from January through to August, which was 3,000. So hence the average is 3. However, that should be an average of 2,000 because across the entire year, my total spend was, if I look at my little preview at the bottom, 24,000, divide that by 12 months, I get 2. And so that just highlights that a zero cell is very different and behaves very differently from an empty cell. And it's important that we understand that. I've seen many spreadsheets where people have blanks and they should be 0 because it represents a 0 value, put it in. So 9 times out of 10, a spreadsheet where the cells are blank should actually be replaced with a 0. There are some cases where you don't want it to be included. That's legit. But typically what I've found is that a lot of spreadsheets are incorrect because empty cells have been put in place where there should have been zeros. Okay, so just be very aware of that. Cool. Moving on to the next point, Excel's golden rule. And so Excel's golden rule says this. This is a genuine golden rule. You can Google it if you want. And it says, if a formula input can change, put it into a cell and refer to it in the formula with a cell reference. So I don't know if you can recall when we looked at the formulas previously, and I can quickly do that again, Control and the tilde key. You can see that there are some formulas in here which have got hard-coded values in. And remember, there are 4 expense categories which we inflation linked. So we've got groceries, household, pets, and entertainment. We've increased by 1% every month to kind of accommodate the fact that those particular items increase every month, whereas other expenses are consistent for a calendar year. That, in a sense, though, is bad practice. For one, is that 101% is hidden. I can't see it unless I'm displaying the formulas. And secondly, that 101% cannot be changed unless I have to physically go and edit each and every one of those formulas. And so the golden rule says, rather pull that out and put it into a separate cell. So I'm going to just quickly take off the formulas. I'll bring them back again just now. But I'm going to insert 2 new rows above row 1. And to do that, I'm going to highlight rows 1 and 2 and right click and insert, because that'll give me 2 rows. And so that's a nice quick shortcut. If you want to highlight or insert more than 1 row, highlight the number you need below where you want to insert, and it'll give you that number. And here we're going to put in inflation percentage. And I'm going to put it here. This is at the moment by month, 1%. Percentage symbol, remember, numbers can be a facade, so that is actually the value 0.01. It's not the value of 1 because I use the percentage symbol. So just be aware of that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reference that cell now in my formula. And if you can't remember where these formulas are, that's where your control and tilde was very useful to display it. And I can edit my formulas in this particular mode. And so here I'm going to go to cell C12 and I'm going to edit that. Double click on that cell or press F2. And that now is going to be, instead of 101, it's going to be 100%, because that's the original value, plus that cell there, which is the percentage 0.01, sorry, is 1%. So it's increased it by that value instead of hard coding it. And then before I exit this formula, I wanted to replicate this across and down. And so I'm going to have to lock that cell reference so that it doesn't change. So the key for that is the function key F4. Press the function key F4. That'll lock that cell reference. And now I can select it and replicate it. So I'm going to replicate it all the way across through to December. I'm then going to replicate it down. Okay. I now need to skip across phone. So I'm going to do the copy and paste thing, which is a quick way to copy a formula. Notice that the cell reference to B15 is still the same because I didn't put any absolute cell references in that. I'm going to do the same with this, replicate it all the way across to here and then replicate it down. Cool. And so that then now has pulled the value for whatever is in cell B1. Take off my formula mode or displaying the formulas. Those values haven't changed, but if I had to change the inflation now, I think to some extent some of these household items, they almost go up by 20% every year. So I'm going to convert that to 2, which is approximately going to be what 20% would be. And notice how all of my inflation-linked categories increased by that percentage each month. I'm going to top this off by actually calculating the monthly inflation by using the overall annual inflation. And so I'm going to insert a further row at the top here, and I'm going to put in here annual inflation. If I could spell, it would help. Inflation, there we go. And so let's say the annual inflation is 15%. I know they tell me that it's 7 or 8. And you accountants among the listeners could probably argue with me on that one, but I think it's more like 15 when it comes to these particular items. And so the monthly one would just be obviously the annual divided by 12. So I'm going to make this equal to my annual inflation, divide that by 12. It might be good to display this to more than just the whole percentage, so maybe to one decimal place. So I'm going to increase the decimal, that's 1.3. And notice, as soon as I change my annual inflation, all these figures change. And that speaks to Excel's golden rule. If a value can change on a spreadsheet, pull it out, put it into a value within a cell on your spreadsheet, and then you just make one change and everything else changes. It then leads me to Excel's second golden rule. Now, unfortunately, this is one of my little inventions that you won't find that on the internet, but I think it's equally important. And the rule says this: never have the same input value listed more than once. Reference the original. And I often find spreadsheets where people have pretty much had the same value and they put it in multiple places, and you end up having to do multiple edits. Now, this particular example, you may have noticed that each successive month is equal to the previous month. And that kind of speaks to the second golden rule, because I could have hard-coded the value of 30,000 all the way through to November. But then I would have been repeating the same value each time. And I want to be able to change January's value, and all of those values change as well. So for example, if I got an increase, let's quickly do that, change that to 33, 10% increase would be fantastic. And you can see how each and every value changes because it's linked to that one cell. And so if you do have multiple cells which you're editing at the same time, rather just have one primary cell that you make the change and reference that cell using the very simple formula of making it equal to the cell that's your go-to cell changer. Okay, so that's Excel's second golden rule, and we'll put that into practice a little bit later as well. Cool. Then, obviously, spreadsheet integrity is key. If we don't have spreadsheet integrity, meaning if there's some calculations which are incorrect, then there's no point in storing all this data and having pretty graphs because our data is incorrect. And so what we can do, instead of just using that formula auditing feature which I showed you earlier, we can build some integrity visually into the spreadsheet. And one of the best ways to do that is to put in a running total. Especially if you have values which are accumulating over time, running totals can add more than just integrity. It actually gives us further insight into our data. So I'm going to add a running total here below my net value in my column A. So I'm going to type in here, running total, and you can follow with me if you're doing so. And to kick this off, we're going to make the assumption that this is starting from scratch. I'm not going to have any net total which has come through from the previous year, carried forward from last year. So I'm going to start from scratch. So our running total will pretty much start with January's value. So I'm going to make it equal to the net value for January. So simply equal to B24. Then in the next cell along, I'm going to then add the previous running total value, which is January's. So it's going to be equal to that. And to that, I'm going to add the next month's value. And so I select C24, here's my formula, reselect that cell and replicate it all the way through to December. And that does one of two things. It gives me a running total, which gives me a bit of peace of mind here because obviously spending more than I'm earning in May, but my cumulative total here in April takes that hit. So I don't actually go below in my running total column. And so that's good. And running total gives me that peace of mind. In addition to that though, these two figures here should be identical. And you can see in this case they are, which means our data integrity is correct. And so you would have seen that, or that basically gives us the peace of mind that those values are correct. Now, sometimes when I actually do this, and it hasn't done it this time, is that when I inserted this average, I'm not too sure if it's happened with you guys, it actually included that in the total. Sometimes Excel does that. When you enter in a value, it will try and add it to the series. And so on one occasion when I did this, this actually had happened. And so it was including the average in this total, and these didn't match. And so that very fact of creating a running total picked that up for me. I could then start to go and investigate what created this running total, and in so doing, finding where those values were incorrect. And so if I double click on here, you can see that clearly is pulling in the average, and so I need to exclude that. And I can either get hold of a little handle hold, which is a little bit tricky. There we go, got it. Pull it across, and that now gives me peace of mind that that is correct. And so be very, very aware of incorrect values in your spreadsheet. Sometimes you can make some assumptions which are incorrect. Running totals confirms your assumptions often, and if not, we can go digging to see where there are inconsistencies in our spreadsheet. Okay, so on point number 6, we just completed 6. We're going to move on to point number 7. Using formula to keep audit trails in your spreadsheet. So let's say in this particular example, I inherited my grand's car. She no longer could drive or use it, and so I've got an extra vehicle that I need to now pay insurance on. So no further car expense, but my insurance is going to be bumped up by $900. And so what often people would do was go and change that. Hopefully most of us could add 900 to 1,000 and get 19. But a better thing to do here would be to actually put this in a little formula. So put an equal sign in front and add 900. It does avoid human error. So a lot of us think we're doing mathematical calculations correctly, but we're actually making mistakes. In addition to that, it actually adds an audit trail. Because if I ever wondered, did I add that insurance value to my overall insurance? And if I go and select that, that there serves as a reminder that indeed I have. And so just use calculations to form audit trails and also to eliminate mathematical errors that may creep in. And that's good practice to get into. And then finally, our 8th point, which we're going to cover, is the importance of empty rows and columns that define a range. Okay, so Excel works in ranges of data, and it uses empty rows and columns to determine what is an empty range or not. And for this little exercise, I'm actually going to hide this average column. So I'm going to right click on it and hide it. Okay, and to determine a completed range, or a range that Excel determines, try that again, a range of data that Excel sees as a connected range, I can use my quick shortcut of Control A to do that. So if I select these cells here, press Control A, notice that it detects and selects the empty rows, and Excel sees that as a range of data. Even it sees this as a little mini range of data. If I go down here, click on Control A, now we would expect that to be joined to this, these 3 cells here as being the range. But because I've got a hidden column here, if I expand that again, with an empty cells, it separates these 2 ranges. And often we can get caught out with that, because when we start to do filtering and sorting of data, it works within the range that Excel's determined as a connected range. And so just be very careful and aware of how Excel determines how a range, or determines your range with your empty rows and columns. And so if I wanted to, in this case, if I wanted to be able to rank and sort my expenses from home loan through to miscellaneous, what I should do is first put in an empty row between these 2 incomes. So right click, click on insert. It's now separated the income from the expenses, and so this functions as an independent range of data. Because the rest of it's connected though, I can select any one of those values and totals, click on data, and choose to rank that in ascending or descending order. And so if I wanted it in ascending order from the lowest expense to the highest, or the highest expense to the lowest, let's just do that one. Okay, it's ranked the data correctly. However, I have got an issue. and that's my miscellaneous column. Miscellaneous row. And this just speaks to the point that if we ever have formulas across rows, and that's what the miscellaneous formula was. Okay, I'm just going to undo that to get back to how it was originally. And if I double click on that cell, you can see it's a combination of my incomes times by 10%, which is calculating my miscellaneous spend. So be very aware, if you've got formulas across rows, when you start to sort data, that's going to go all pear-shaped. I can fix that though, and use my absolute cell references to lock those rows. And so if I had to squeak in a dollar symbol, I can either cycle through my F4, which I'm doing here, to get to just $5, because the column I want to keep as relative. So I'm cycling through that, or I could manually put a $sign in front of the row reference. Then I'm going to replicate that all the way through to December. That should hopefully fix that row reference. And now if I start to rank this, click on Z to A. There we go. I've fixed that row reference, and so it's not going to deviate from my income 1 and income 2 rows, and it works correctly. So just be aware of that when you start to sort, as well as the fact that it's your empty rows and empty columns which defines a range which you will then be able to sort. And so that there is a neat overview of all the things we covered in the Essentials course, plus a couple of kind of advanced tweaks of that to highlight the importance of keeping our data integrity, and also just simple tips and tools and tricks on how to work with an existing set of data. Okay. What we're going to do here now is I'm going to move on to the next 2 sections which I want to cover. And I may come back to this just to show you a recap on graphs, but I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I want to make sure we cover the other features first. And so I'm going to move on to this cell, this tab here of cell references, and that's going to introduce us again to mixed cell references. But what I want to do here is I want to pull through the expenses from my total budget here on the Golden Rule sheet. And so the best way to do that is to highlight those expenses and the headings. I'm going to highlight those rows and columns there from A8 to B21. I'm going to copy those. I'm going to go to my cell references here, and I'm going to want to paste them into this convenient set of rows in my new sheet. Now, if I just did a normal paste, then obviously things will go pear-shaped if there were formulas there. Or if I did a normal paste of just the values, then I'll have duplication, which I want to avoid, because that's what my second golden rule says. And so a neat feature here would be to go to Paste Special and to paste the link. So if I paste the link of that data, notice if I select those cells, they are referencing the golden rule sheet. And so anything changes here on the golden rule sheet, it will automatically change in the sheet. Notice that my marching ants are still running around that, so the copy state is still there. And another neat feature that I can quickly demo is if I right click again and go to Paste Special, and I wanted to pull through the formats, I can paste just the formats. So not the data, I've already done that by linking it. Click on OK, and those formats come through. So the bolding, even the cell borders have been changed, and I've now got my currency symbol displayed against each of those values. And so what I'm going to try and achieve here is I'm wanting to figure out over a year now how inflation will potentially affect all of my expenses. And so I'm going to give me a range of inflation percentages and then calculate like a 2-dimensional array table here, which will display each and every expense at various different percentages. So to kick off with, I'm going to put in a percentage that was a predetermined or pre-formatted cell of a percentage. If I go to my home ribbon, you can see it's already pre-formatted as a percentage. And I'm wanting to now increase each of these by 1%. I could generate a series, but I'm going to use a formula instead, so that if I wanted to change my starting point, I can. So I'm going to make this cell equal to the 5%, which is C4, and I'm going to add 1% to that. Okay, it's defaulted to 2 decimal places. This shortcut here will remove that, and I'm going to then replicate that all the way through to column O. And so that's increasing by 1% each time. If, when you replicate that formula, you don't want it to overwrite the actual formatting, notice there's an option here to fill without formatting, and then my little line returns to me on the edge of column O. And so those are little neat features which we had previously taught, but I'm just sneaking them in here for those who are not aware of them. And here what we're going to do is we're going to put in a formula which will calculate for each of my expenses the percentage increase, ranging from 5% all the way through to 17%. And we're going to use our mixed cell references here. So that's not absolute and it's not relative, it's somewhere in between to help generate these. And so we're going to kick off here by starting in cell C5, and I'm going to increase this value of 8,000 Rand by 5%. And we've done something similar to this in the golden rule sheet. Okay, so it is fairly similar, but there's a little twist to this tale. So first I'm going to make this equal to the 8,000 Rand, and I want to increase it by 5%. If I had just multiplied it by 5%, that'll calculate 5% of the value. So if I just did that, I'm going to get 400 Rand. So I want to increase it, and so to do that, I need to first add the original value. And so it's going to be B5 multiplied by 1 plus that 5%. So that 1 is going to be the original value of 8,000. So B5 times 1 will give me 8,000. Then I'm going to add the 4% to that. Sorry, the 5%, which is in C4. And that gives me 8,400, which is exactly what I want. If I go and replicate the cell down though, I get some horrible formulas here because remember, formulas become relative to their new location. So that 5% is going to start moving down. And obviously that's a massive number compared to 5%. And so I've got some huge figures here, which Excel cannot even display. They're massive. There they are. And so what I need to do is I need to lock the row reference to that 5%. So I'm going to double click in here and lock the row reference, which is row number 4. So the dollar sign goes in front of the 4. I do not want to lock the column because when I replicate that, I want that to change relative to the new location. So just locking the row number 4. Similarly, when I replicate this across, notice how it's going to start dragging this column. And so here, this now starts to move across, and I want to lock that reference to column B. And so in a similar vein, let's come out of that, undo, I'm going to lock the column reference to the cell to the left. And so when we ever create a two-dimensional array like this, just a general rule of thumb, and it tells me at the top here in my little brief notes, it says always lock the reference from the cell to the left and the row reference from the cell above. And so column on the left is locked, that's column B. Row above, which is row 4, that is locked. So if I reselect that cell now, replicate it all the way across, that. Again, I want to leave the formatting behind, so fill without formatting. And then I'm going to replicate it down. Again, I'm going to fill without formatting. And each and every one of those figures now should be referencing the correct percentage above and the correct expense value on the left. And double clicking that will confirm that for me. So you can see if I double click on that, directly above the percentage, directly to the left, the value. And so I've pretty much generated a series of, how many formulas are there? I can just reselect those. My total, 182 formulas. I've created 182 formulas simply by replicating a mixed cell reference. I did this as a live training session a couple of years ago actually, and one guy had spent 4 hours creating something like this, and he said, where were you yesterday? To explain how to achieve all of these values simply by creating one formula. Obviously some formatting issues going on here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change all of those number formats. There's no point in displaying the rand symbol. It's just a little bit too overboard, and they're all currency values. So I'm going to just choose to display this with the 1000 separator with no decimals. So that's pretty neat. And then obviously to top this up, top this off, I could just put a totals in here, totals column, and I'm going to put totals, alt and equals as a quick shortcut to get my total, auto sum, and I'm going to replicate that guy across. And again, fill without formatting. Okay, so that there would be a grand total. Let's just bold that. And so I can see currently my expenses are costing me 34,400. Lo and behold, if, and hopefully it never will be, but inflation is up to 17% across the board, my total expenses will be 40,000, and those are all the values in between. And so that's a very neat way of creating a table array of different values to explore how a particular total, in this case my expenses, perform across those various different percentages. Okay, that's great. I think I will have time to squeak in my graph. So let's do that before I move on to the goal seek, which is our last feature of the day. And we're planning to finish by about 11:15. So there are time for questions at the end. But just quickly, under the golden rule sheet, if I go back to that, if I wanted to create a graph of this, which will represent my entire budget in one single graph, you can see at the moment I've got two individual graphs. First, my net value and my annual expenses, and we achieved those in our Excel Essentials homework exercises, if you can recall doing that. But then finally, what we want to do here is create a graph of everything. And so first, I'm going to highlight the data that I need to graph. So I'm going to highlight the months all the way through to December. Hold down the control key, which is key here to be able to highlight disconnected ranges within my spreadsheet. So I've highlighted my months, I've highlighted my expenses. I'm going to insert a column chart of this, and I want to stack it so that it puts all the different values on top of each other. So there's my stacked column chart. Now, depending on how many rows and columns you have, I won't go into the details, but Excel could potentially have got it the wrong way around, which in this case it has. So it's stacked my expenses, so the individual monthly contributions are stacked on top of each other. I wanted it to stack the individual expenses by months. And so there's a very simple button I can press or command I can select to change that, and that is just to switch row and column. So if I do that, you can see now I've switched those around, and I have now got my months across the bottom, stacking my expenses. And so basically these totals at the top here will correspond to my total expense items. So in effect, even though I haven't graphed the total expenses, the very fact that I've stacked these on top of each other actually gives me those totals, which is pretty neat. Then, to be overly ambitious here, what I want to do is to actually add my total income as a line series overlaid on top of my stack column. And the way that I can do that is I need to go and add a new series to my chart. And to do that, click on Select Data. Here are all my current series, so those are all my expenses listed on the left. I'm going to simply add a new series. Now, this can be a bit confusing because when we highlight data, we don't have to worry about the series name and the series values. Excel takes care of that on its own. And so just be aware that this is just the series name, not the actual values itself. It used to confuse me. And so if I click in there and select total income, so that's the name, I'm pulling it from the spreadsheet, which speaks to my Excel golden rule itself, not duplicating a value. I'm referencing it here. And then over here, delete the default series. I need to delete it first, otherwise it just appends it, and highlight the corresponding incomes. There we go. Click on OK, and OK again. So the moment that's stacked them all on top as part of my expense stack, I don't want it like that. I want to display it separately. So if I click on that series, I can then edit that independently by right-clicking and choosing to change the series chart type. And right down here at the bottom, there he is, my total income. I'm going to change that to a line graph. And there we have it. That's the graph in its preview format. And there we go. And that's a very neat chart of my total expenses as well as my income. And you can see here where this falls below my expenses, exceeds my income. You can see it graphically represented there. And obviously the gap I'm looking for is this big gap here, which means I'm earning a lot more than I'm spending. Any one of those is selectable, so you can click on it or hover over it, and it tells you exactly what that individual contributing factor is. So that's the health point for May, value 6,500. That clearly is the one which is causing the stack to go across and above my income. And so a very neat way of graphically representing my data. I want to pop that onto a completely new sheet because I've got no place to put it here. So I'm going to cut that, Control X, and I'm going to create a new sheet and paste it. And I can stretch that all the way across. Let's delete the title, give me a bit of extra room, and there's a neat graph representing my entire budget. Okay, so let's just rename this to main graph. The homework exercise, which I'm going to talk about just now, does contain one or two graphs. So it was important that I showed you the basics of how to do it. Not as complex as that, but at least it introduces how to create graphs. And the last section we're going to look at now is called GoalSeek. And it also talks about editing, manipulating existing spreadsheets. So I'm going to go across to GoalSeek here now, if you could do the same. And what this does, it basically turns a formula on its head. And so often what we want to do is set the outcome of a formula by changing the input value. And sometimes we have to do guesswork to do that. So let's say I've got a very simple scenario here where I'm selling an item which cost me a certain amount, but I want the total value to be 150. And so I want to be able to sell this particular item, but I want to display it as a cost and VAT figure on their particular invoice. And so I need to fiddle with this actual cost amount here. I'm selling it for 150 bucks, but I need to display what the actual cost item is with VAT. And so I can fiddle with this to see what this total will change to. So I should actually show you the formulas behind here first. So here's VAT, which is multiplying my cost by 15%. And here's my total, which is just adding the VAT value to the original amount. Okay, so those are the two formulas in play here. And so if I had to try and do this manually, I could say, okay, well, I need to bump this up a bit. So 132. Okay, so that's over. So it must be somewhere in between. So 131. Okay, we're getting a bit closer. So maybe 130 Rand 50. And you can see where I'm going here. It's going to take quite a long time to get this spot on to the nearest cent of 150 bucks. And so GoalSeek enables me to set this final value, which is being used in a formula, and get Excel to do the guesswork and figure out what the cost display value should be. And so selecting the value, the final value, I'm going to go to my data ribbon at the top, go to my forecasting collection of commands, what if analysis. Okay, so what if that final value was exactly 150? So I'm going to click on GoalSeek. It detects that cell that I've already got selected already, or put it in there, so I don't have to worry about that. Just move here to the value, and I want that exactly 150 bucks. And the cell that I'm wanting to change is the cost input cell. And so I'm going to select that. It pops it in there. Click on OK. And you can see Excel does all the guesswork for me. If you watch it closely, it actually does trial and error, but a lot quicker than I can. And if I want to accept that figure, I just click on OK. If I don't, I click on Cancel. I click on OK, and you can see here it's now set what my cost value should be, calculated the VAT and the total. Now, I probably could have inverted those formulas and calculated it myself, but it's a lot quicker for me just to get Excel to do the dirty work for me. Where it becomes very powerful is in a more complex spreadsheet. And so we're going to revisit our budget on the golden rule sheet just to give a few more examples of how GoalSeek can work for us. So I'm going back to the golden rule sheet. Okay. So at the moment, with this increased, what was it? I can't find it now because I changed the order. It was my insurance. There we go. My increased insurance of 900 Rand. We now have a case where even my running total is dipping below the zero, the golden zero mark. And so I'm wanting to figure out, based on this budget, how much more I would need to earn, let's say in commission, how much more I need to earn to avoid getting into the red completely here under running totals. And I can use GoalSeek to sort that for me. So what I do is I select the cell that I'm wanting to change. So I want to change that there to 0. Select that, go to my data ribbon, go to what if analysis, go to GoalSeek. Okay, so that's the one I'm wanting to change. The value here is simply 0. Put it in 0. And the cell that I'm wanting to change is my income 1. And so I'm going to scroll up here for January. Now the clue for this to work is that all of these formulas, so all of these subsequent incomes are connected to January using the formula which says equal to the previous month. If I didn't have this, I would simply spike January and all of these would stay the same. So that is key. Second golden rule of making cells equal to a primary cell is key in this case. Click on OK. And you can see here, I have to earn close to extra 400 Rand a month for me to be able to keep my head just above water across all the months from January through to December. If you want to accept that, click on OK. If you was just to have a quick look, you could click on cancel. We're going to accept that one for now. Click on OK, and you can see it actually keeps those changed values. We're going to do this a third time just to re-emphasize how GoalSeek works and how I can just change the focus to a different area of my spreadsheet. So let's say I want to change my focus now to my net value. Okay. Now that I can see I can increase my income and keep my head above water, let's be a little bit more ambitious. Let's say I'm saving up for something big and I want to see if I can get a net value of 60,000. And so that becomes my focus. Click on that, what if analysis, go to GoalSeek, and here I'm going to change that to 60 grand, so 60,000. And the value I'm wanting to change again is income 1. So I click on income 1, click on OK, and there we go. Okay, so that's obviously a lot more now. I'd have to earn 34,136 exactly. So that's a little bit too ambitious. I'm going to click on cancel on this. It was just inquisitive. I was just interested to see if it would work, but clearly I'm not going to be able to earn that amount. So click on cancel. As long as I keep my head above water, that's the most important thing. And so you can see here how GoalSeek helps you to set an output value, which is based on a formula, by changing an input value, which is a hard-coded value. And that's the key thing, is that that input value cannot be a formula, otherwise it won't work. And the output value has to be formula-driven. Okay. The one drawback with GoalSeek, though, is that it only enables you to change one value. And so what I'm going to introduce you to, we don't normally do this in our advanced course, but a lot of people have asked me about it, so I've decided to squeeze it in here in the advanced webinar course. And that is to introduce you to an add-on that Excel offers called Solver, which enables you to set more than one value. And so I'm going to use a very simple business model here to see how Excel can solve a particular problem that I have and maximize my revenue in this little simple business that I have. And so what I've got here, just to put this into context, I sell furniture, well, I make furniture, and I do just 3 basic items: a table, chair, and a bookcase. That's what the raw material is costing me for each of those. That's what I sell them at. And so obviously my markup, there's a little formula in there, which is just subtracting the sales price from the raw material. Now, the critical component here is that the number of hours it takes for me to, or takes my workshop to be able to produce these different items. So the hours taken here is 20 for a table, 8 for a chair, and 6 for a bookcase. Currently what I've got in my table here is that the number of items produced, I've got 3 tables, 12 chairs, and 3 bookcases. And the reason for that is that for every table that I sell, I need to actually have 4 chairs. So I need at least 4 times the number of chairs as tables. I can sell the chairs independently, but for every table, I need to put 4 chairs around it. And so that is why I've set that, currently hard-coded that at 12. And the bookcases, typically I can only sell 1 bookcase for every 3 chairs sold. They're a lot easier to produce and would be my best seller if I could sell them all. But I've learned from experience that for every bookcase sold, I have to sell at least 3 chairs. So I could possibly bump it up to 4, because 12 divided by 4 is 3. And so what this revenue here is doing, you can see there's a calculation. It's multiplying my markup by the number of items produced. And so that gives me those individual figures per item and my grand total at the bottom. And here there is my total hours. And this here is my restricting factors, the total hours. I only have 400 labor hours per month. So you can see my primary constraint here is I only have 400 labor hours. Again, each table has to have 4 chairs, so I have to have at least 4 times the number of chairs, or produce 4 times the number of chairs as the table. And on average, I can only sell 1 bookcase for every 3 chairs sold. Now, I could possibly use GoalSeek for this, and I'm going to show you how I could possibly use GoalSeek for this. If I forced these to be formulas, and I said, okay, well, I know it says I had to produce at least 4 times the chairs, but let's force it to be exactly 4 times. So I'm going to say that this here is equal to 3 times 4. So that is formula linked. Okay, I'm going to keep the bookcases as they are, and what I'm going to do is use GoalSeek to set that at 400 hours and then get it to change the number of tables, and that will bump up the number of chairs. So here's a very kind of simple way of trying to get a solution. It's not the ideal solution, we're going to get to that just now, but to use GoalSeek, I would do this: what if analysis, GoalSeek, change the value to 400 hours by changing cell, the number of tables I'm producing. So that cell there, click on OK. And you can see here, it changed it to 7 tables, 29 chairs, and still 4 bookcases, because I couldn't include a 3rd dimension into my bookcase. And so obviously I'm a bit stuck. It's helped me a little bit, so I could potentially tweak this manually, but this is not the ideal solution. So I'm going to click on cancel on that one. And I'm going to introduce you to this add-on called Solver. Now it is an add-on, so you need to go and activate it under your options within Excel. And so if you don't have Solver, there you can see I've got Solver under my data ribbon on the far right hand side. I'm going to quickly show you how to add it. There are some notes if you forget here on the right hand side how to add Solver. And so to add Solver to your Excel product offering, if you want to follow with me, you click on the File option at the very top, go to Options at the very bottom, so File and then Options. There's the add-ins just above Trust Center, so if you can select that. So you can see there's the Solver add-in, but you don't add it there. It's a little bit confusing. You have to click on this Manage, which says Excel add-ins. So make sure Excel add-ins is selected there, click on Go. And you can see there are a couple of add-ins you can add. Solver add-in is the last one. So just tick that box and click on OK. And if you've done that correctly, under your data ribbon now, you should have Solver as an option to select. Okay, so once you've got that now, we can start employing this. I am going to go through it pretty quickly. It's sometimes quite difficult to understand, but a lot of people ask me about this, so I thought I would squeeze it in here. I've got 5 minutes to quickly run through it, so let's get started. Click on Solver, and you can see I've got a couple more parameters that I can add in here. And so first up is my objective. So my objective here, obviously is my number of hours. Sorry, not number of hours, it's my revenue. I need to maximize my revenue. So I wanted to increase my revenue as much as possible. My restriction is my total hours. And so I'm going to select that as my objective. And you can see I can set it to max, min, or a particular value. I want to maximize that. Okay. And the values that I'm changing, and I can select more than one here, and that's key, are these numbers. So these numbers are the ones that I can change. So I'm going to highlight those. Okay, so those can change. What I should have done before, and I think I kept that as formulas. Hey, I should have set that without a formula. So I'm going to quickly close that, sorry. Go back here. That should not be a formula. That should be a hard-coded value. My bad. Because I can't change a value that's formula-driven. That was just to do the kind of rude way of doing it with, or crude way, I should say, of doing it with the what-if analysis, goal-seek. Okay, so those figures cannot have formulas in them. That's a key thing to be reminded of as well. So going back to Solver, it should keep it. There we go. Yeah, it does actually keep the setting that you've got, even if you close it. And so the values there still being changed is F11 to F13. And here we can start adding a whole lot of constraints. Okay, so first constraint I'm going to add is that, and I've listed them here. It's often good to do this so that you can get the syntax right here. So H18, okay, which is, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. My number of labor hours. Okay, so my labor hours here, this value here needs to be less than 400. It shouldn't be H18, it should be G14. So obviously got that syntax wrong there. So it's G14. So this is the value here, H14. Finally got it right. H14 needs to be less than 400. Okay, so that needs to be less than or equal to 400. Now I can hard code a value in there, or if I want to be able to adjust it, rather pull it out and put it in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to select the number of hours as H17. So H14, I'll modify this just now. Obviously, I've deleted a number of rows here and I forgot to change that. So let's just add that one. So I'm going to click on add. That adds it and enables me to add another one. The next constraint is that my number of chairs has to be greater than or equal to 4 times the number of tables. Okay, so my number of chairs here is this cell. And that has to be greater than or equal to the number of tables, which is that cell multiplied by 4. Okay, so that little formula there says chair number has to be greater than or equal to number of tables times 4. I'm going to add a third one, and that is that for every bookcase, I have to sell at least 3 chairs. Okay, so bookcases, I'm going to select that, my number of bookcases, and that has to be greater than or equal to my number of chairs times 3. Other way around. So my bookcases here, so remember chairs here have to be greater than or equal to my number of bookcases times by 3. I'll eventually get this right. Number of bookcases here times by 3. There we go. Click on OK. Okay, so I got my various constraints there. Let's hope I've done those right. These incorrect name cell references have confused me somewhat, so obviously it's important to get those right off the bat. Let's click on solve and see what I get. It says it's got a solution for me. Click on OK. Okay, so this looks great. Okay, it's fulfilled my criteria. The only snag though here is that I have got decimals. So even though it's displayed to one decimal, to no decimal places, if I look at my formula bar, I obviously can't produce a fraction or a portion of one of these items. So I want to add some more criteria which will force those to be integers. And so I'm going to quickly add those back again. So go to Solver, and I'm going to add some more criteria. So I'm going to click on Add. And the first criteria is that this value has to be an integer. So if you can see here, there's an option for int. So I'm going to click on int for that. And you can see that the constraint is integer. click on add. So for each one of these, they need to be integers. Add another one. There we go. Click on OK. Click on solve. Click on OK again. And there we have it. So I need 6 tables, 28 chairs, and 9 bookcases to optimize my revenue at 88,750, and it still fulfills my constraint of being under 400 hours. And so you can see how Solver enables you to apply more than one constraint to a formula, as well as being able to set multiple values. So here I was able to set 3 values. And so it becomes a very powerful tool if you've got a solution which you need Excel to resolve, and GoalSeek is far too simplistic for it. Then Solver is a very powerful tool to do that. I should just fix these because these were incorrect. So this here, 400 hours, so this was H14. So let's just double click on that, change that to H14. This here was referring to my number of chairs, so that there was F12. Sorry, apologies for this. We've kind of added this last minute. Hopefully it's been helpful. I just need to fix that. And then these figures here will also be incorrect. So that there's my number of tables times 4, which is 11. And this here is my number of chairs, which is 12. Okay, so that is not correct. I will correct that in the workbook going forward. So if you want to re-download it from our website, you could do so. But that, in a nutshell, gives you a brief introduction to Solver. And if you do need to solve with multiple criteria, it's a fantastic tool. It actually borders in the realms of linear programming, if you ever looked at that, but uses Excel's algorithms to actually get you the result. Okay, so just 3 minutes over. Sorry, Shane. We've got just 12 minutes for questions if there are any. So if you're still out there, if you're able to pick up and let me know if there are any questions based on anything that I covered. For example, mail merge is going to be quite tricky to do, to do that within the space of a couple of minutes. But you can, there is a way that you can set the format of that in mail merge. It's actually in Office itself. You change the format there. So if your Excel value is different, then you can get it to do it in Word itself. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here though, what you could do if you wanted to round that figure in Excel. So I don't know if you guys know the round function. So to round something to the nearest integer, am I back on my screen here? If I wanted to pull that through, I could use, and if I wanted to pull it from a different location, I'm going to use the round function to round that figure. And so if I equal that figure, if I equal it like that, obviously it's going to pull through the exact value of what's in A3. But if I use the round function, I'm going to put round in front of it, equal to round, and tab on that. I just need to specify how many digits to round this to. So if it's to the nearest whole number, which you want as an integer, I put in a 0 and press enter. And that actual value, you can see there are no decimals there at all. And so Excel will work with it as if it's a whole number. And then when you import it using a mail merge, should also display that figure without any decimals. I have had the issue though, when I do pull through data, for example, if you display it as a rand symbol in Excel and you want to pull it through like that in Word, it sometimes doesn't pull it through. And so there is a way to change the formatting in the mail merge itself. And I'll bear that in mind. Maybe I'll kick off next week's session by showing you the mail merge. It's just not going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to set that up now in 5 minutes because mail merge is quite a thing. And so I could potentially do that there. But to change it in Excel, just try that off the bat and see if that works. I'm suspecting it should because that value has now had the decimals removed, not just for display purposes, but the actual value is now changed to a nearest whole number. For those of you who are new, who didn't come in the Excel Essentials webinar course, what worked very well last time was that we we actually gave you some homework to do. So it basically reinforced all the things that I covered, or as much as I could possibly in a shortened version task, to recap the things that were covered in the session itself. And so I've got what I've got up here on the screen is the current Excel webinar task number 1. And you can see there's some data there, and there's some task questions on the right-hand side. Simple 8 tasks. We're doing this a little bit differently this time. So instead of giving you a separate sheet that you need to print out, which can be a little bit cumbersome, we'll display on the secondary monitor. The questions are listed right here. And it will be a good idea for you to run through those. It shouldn't take you more than 10, 15 minutes max to run through those, but it does emphasize some of the key things that I covered during the course of today's session, including goal seek, which is question number 7 there. And the way that we work it is that if you get onto the paid version, obviously this was a free introductory session, and for here on, you'll need to be a paid subscriber to these webinars. And so if you are a paid subscriber, then you are welcome to email me through these tasks, and I can have a quick squiz at it to see if you got it correct. If you're happy for me just to go through it again, which I will do in the start of the next session, I'll quickly do a recap on the homework exercises then by all means just keep it and run through it with me in a week's time. But if you'd like me to have a quick look at it, then you're welcome to email it through to me at Mark@Summit-Solutions. I can make a quick squiz at it, give you some feedback on it to see if you got it correct or not. And that has proved to be a very valuable tool, this homework exercise, to reinforce. As Shane said right in the very beginning, we learn by doing, and that will reinforce the things that we've covered during the course of today's session.